Good afternoon, little brother.
Good afternoon, big brother.
We are the Stinemetz brothers, and we are the pseudo scholars. This is our podcast, and this is our schoolhouse. Each week, we're going to be grappling with our own realities by exploring different topics that interest us.
Topics like what is the future of space exploration, or why do human beings commit suicide, or what makes the freaking New England Patriots so much freaking better than everybody else in the NFL. These are the kind of ideas that we're going to break down. We're going to try to challenge conventional thinking, and then hopefully everybody, you and us, are going to walk away informed, stimulated, and inspired.
Yeah. And last week, we talked about the development of progressive martial arts. Specifically, we talked a lot about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, since that's where you and I have a bit of experience. And last week's challenge, Cade, at the end of the session, we challenged you to tap out a blue belt. That is to submit a blue belt by choke or arm bar or some other variant. So how'd you get on?
Yeah, so training last week went pretty well. Instead of trying to tap out a blue belt, I decided to take my odds with a brown belt, which if people don't know out there, it means the person's probably been training for 10 years, and it means they probably can kill anyone that they touch. But good news is I got pretty close to a head and arm choke. Bad news is the guy was probably going 25% of his capacity, and he proceeded to tap me out like 6 or 7 times in a row. And I was actually taking the trash out yesterday, and my elbow is still sore from trying to keep from submitting to his armbar. But it was kind of it was a wasted effort, but it was fun.
So you failed the challenge, but you gave it a try. Not only did you go for the blue belt, you went all the way to the brown belt, and he smoked you.
Yeah, that's right. Gives me a little humility for when I go into the gym next time to keep things fresh. So
that's cool. All right. Well, so why don't we get into our topic for this week? This week, we've been asking ourselves, is the media making up our minds for us? What do you think about this one, little bro?
Well, I mean, I think it's an amazing question to be asking at this point in time because of what we see happening in the world today, right? Every single person has a computer that's more powerful than any computer 20 years ago. And oh, by the way, we have it sitting in our pocket or right by us at all times, right? And so the constant consumption of media has me thinking really about this question a little bit deeply and thinking, gosh, how much influence do other people have on my own decision making and really my own identity, right? Because we're really made up of our opinions and our thoughts about the world. And so I think it's a really interesting question for everyone out there to think a little bit more deeply about and see what we can understand about it.
Yeah. And I think one of the main reasons it's probably on the tops of our minds right now is born out of the election, of course, right? Everybody was talking about fake news. How often do we hear about fake news towards the end of the election, and really even in the last few months since Trump's been in office? But for me, Cade, I think this is a story of information technology. It's just been fun to see how technology's advanced in the way that we consume digital media and how it's had a bigger and greater influence on all of us, sometimes for the worse. And so I think that's what we want to talk about today. But if you don't mind, I'm going to try to break it down as the way I see it and try to build this thing back up and give us a little bit more grasp on what actually is happening out there with fake news.
Yeah, go for it. Give us some context.
Okay, so I think we can all probably agree that fake news has been around forever. I mean, people have always been trying to influence other people through misinformation. A few cool historical examples. A lot of people know the Roman historian Livy. Livy was famous for kind of making the Roman conquests out to seem admirable and courageous, when in reality, we know that the Roman conquests were pretty gruesome displays of probably mass genocide in many cases. So that was one case of using propaganda to influence the Roman people. And most of the Roman people thought that these conquests were for the greater good. They didn't actually realize what was going on out on the battlefields, and then oftentimes not on the battlefields, like in the towns and villages where women and children were being slayed for the expansion of the empire. And then another great example, maybe the best example actually, of the use of not necessarily misinformation. We can negotiate whether or not this is misinformation, but a great example of the spread of media was Gutenberg's printing press. So in the 15th century, we all learned about it in school. Gutenberg came up with this system for basically printing content over and over again for the very first time. Prior to that, everything had been handwritten. So what was the very first thing that he printed, Cade? What do you think?
Probably the Bible, right?
Yeah, the Bible. 200 copies were the very first thing that got printed on the printing press. And it's no coincidence that the Protestant Reformation caught on fire and that Martin Luther probably wouldn't have had the same levels of influence had he not been able to put Bibles in the hands of every single individual he was trying to reach. Because prior to that, the Catholic Church had no ability to do that, and they were just lecturing their people in the pews, essentially.
Right. No, I think that's a good point too, because the transformation of the Protestant Reformation, not only does it have influence on pretty much all of American life today and American society, but it also paints the picture of two different worldviews, right? We say that we have an issue with mass media today, that I'm getting information thrown at me every second of every day. But then you have the opposite type of economy when it comes to media, and that's one person at the top, like the Catholic Church or like the Roman Empire, where all of the media is controlled by the state or by some kind of power hierarchy, and that really is going to control what people hear anyway. So I think for me, it's a little bit conflicting in knowing, well, which one would I rather have, right? Because it seems like there's some cons on both sides and some pros.
Yeah. But nonetheless, the Gutenberg printing press was like highly influential in spreading of a particular idea. Whether we think it was right or wrong, we can argue that in the next podcast. But let's fast forward 500 years. Okay, let's get to the era of the internet. Now we can instantly store and access information, and it's all stored and accessed on these massive networks of databases that we call the internet. So like, the internet is great. I mean, can you think of anything that's been more influential in our lives than the internet, Cade?
No, absolutely not. When we're talking about it today, right? Like Shane is, for people that don't know, he sells products on Amazon. He's also building a web application for Amazon sellers. And oh, by the way, the apple doesn't fall that far from the brother tree. And I'm actually getting into the FBA world as well. So, I mean, when you think about how technology has mobilized the economy to do things that we've never seen, to see growth that we've never seen before, it's been, the most influential discovery of the last 30 years, I'd say.
Yeah, and I would say way beyond even that much. But certainly in our lifetime, nothing has been as influential. But the problem with it is that there's so much bullshit. There's so much information that's being created and thrown about, and it's hard to decipher. So it's wonderful that the information is easily available. It's maybe not so wonderful that the information is now more easily curated and launched out into the seas of the interwebs through platforms like WordPress, because now you don't even have to speak computer languages. You don't have to be able to talk computer in order to create content. You can put together a YouTube video like the two of us are doing right now, launch it in a few minutes, and that information is out there, and somebody's going to watch it, or somebody's going to listen to it or read it, and they're going to take it and they're going to think it's truth. So the biggest problem now, I suppose, is that there's just this massive wealth of information. Some of it's bullshit, some of it's high quality, some of it's truth. But in order to get to the good stuff, you need to have a filter. And that's the only way to really live in this world. So the most powerful company in the world recognized this and maximized their abilities to control what we're searching for.
Wait, what company are you talking about?
We're talking about Google. So what Google is really doing, although we don't understand the algorithm necessarily, is they're probably trying to show us the information that's most pertinent to us. They're trying to show us the information that we're trying to get to. It's in their own best interest to do that. But what they're also trying to do is show us the content that's most likely to lead towards us clicking an advertisement and buying a product, because that's ultimately how they get paid, through advertisements. They don't get paid when you search for some particular topic in the Google search bar. So those are kind of the things that Google's after, not necessarily the enemy we're speaking about today, if we are speaking about an enemy, but just bringing together this idea of a filter, of some way of influencing all of this information that's out there and trying to get to what you need to get to. So there's all these filters that have high degrees of influence. And the biggest challenge now is trying to figure out how much your filter is influencing you based off of the agenda of the filter you're using. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think that another question that we have to ask ourselves is, right, when we talk about being influenced by media that we really, really like, I think that neither you nor I nor most people are raised with a healthy enough level of skepticism about the information that's coming their way. And I know with our parents or with our teachers or coaches or whoever else was kind of an influence on your life, they built some level of trust, right? You had a relationship. You could peer into their soul a little bit. You understood their character. Media is not the same way, right? You have no idea who these people are, where they come from, what kind of agendas they have. So I think skepticism all the more when it comes to accepting and internalizing information that's coming from these kind of sources, but something interesting to think about.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that's the problem that we want to try to grapple with today. So hopefully that's a bit of an introduction into like where fake news has come from, or at least why that's such a big challenge today. And idea here is to sort out how we can live and function in an environment where there is so much fake news. And
Yeah.
so Kate, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Things are just bubbling up as you're speaking through all of this right now, because I mean, I think politically, right, that's going to be one of the quickest ways that you can separate people into two different categories, unfortunately. But even us, right, raised, I would say, very conservative fiscally and socially. I can say that even that level, 20 years of influence has led a different type of skepticism about Fox News or about, kind of right-wing media. But at the same time, too, it's so hard for me when I'm reading through media and I see clips that are bashing Trump immediately to just say, well, it's just the other side, right? It's just an opposing viewpoint that's immediately got an agenda. They're trying to influence people. They're trying to cater to people that are going to click on that site and propagate whatever kind of things that they want to say about whatever it is that they might be critiquing.
Yeah. Well, I think the hard reality is that most of the media sites that you're getting your content from are trying to influence you and do have an agenda. And that might be one of the biggest takeaways from today. Just recognizing that there is always an agenda. If you can understand what that agenda is, it'll be generally beneficial as you're trying to screen out or create like maybe your own personal filter on the information that's already been filtered to you. So I want to tell a story, Cade. This is a pretty interesting story that some people may have seen that came across through Vice that I read about. And this is basically a story of how Donald Trump has used psychometrics specifically to influence advertising and convince or at least encourage his base to get out and vote. We don't know exactly how much this influenced the election, but it could have been tremendously. So, I mean, it starts with a story of this Polish psychologist. This guy was named as Michael Kaczynski. I don't know if people have heard about Michael Kaczynski, but he got his start in Cambridge, and he was in Cambridge and he was studying psychology, and along with a lot of other people are sort of responsible for recognizing or identifying that there are 5 major personality assessments that could be utilized to understand a person's needs. So there's 5 categories. So let's talk about them. The first one is openness. Openness is your willingness to change. The second is conscientiousness. And that's like whether or not you're a perfectionist. And then extroversion is the third. That really relates to how social you are or your abilities to interact with people that you've never met in the first place. And then agreeableness is the fourth. This is about how considerate or cooperative a person is. And then lastly is their neuroticism. Like how easily upset are they? So openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and then neuroticism. And they create this acronym called OCEAN. And so it was Michael Kaczynski's finding that if you really just focused on these 5 categories, you could get a much deeper understanding of people's needs. Sounds simple enough, right?
Right. Yeah. So I'm a little confused. Are you saying that basically what happened is this guy was able to boil down what people's media needs are, or at least the media manipulated what their needs are from a psychoanalytical perspective, and therefore the media can take that, brand their content in a certain way, and know that that's going to be most agreeable to literally your humanness, your personality. Therefore, you're going to be more likely to absorb the content. Is that your point?
Right. That's where we're getting. So, but it really just started with this guy, this Polish guy, and a few other colleagues identifying that these 5 categories were the most influential categories in terms of trying to understand a person's needs. So that's actually where this whole thing started. And it's not until it was paired with big data. So you've made the next leap for us. Right. So once he got to Cambridge and had made these assessments, he started trying to get his tests out there and really confirm the data, or confirm some of his assumptions that he had made about these 5 major personality assessments called Ocean. And the way he did that was through Facebook surveys. So in 2008, were you on Facebook, Cade?
That might be right around the time I was getting on Facebook, probably just before.
Maybe that might just be a little bit early. I mean, that seems to be still, my timeline's correct. That's still about the era when it was limited to a few Ivy League schools, and then maybe within a year or two, I was on when it was
Stanford and all those guys. Yeah,
Harvard initially, but nonetheless, I mean, it was then released to all universities in the United States, and like that's about the time that people were getting on. So they started doing surveys on Facebook before Facebook was really big. But as Facebook was growing, they started getting more and more participants participating in this survey, which was essentially evaluating those 5 personality characteristics. And then they started like drawing some interesting correlations. Like, so how about this one, for example? Followers, if you followed Lady Gaga on Facebook, you were more likely to be extroverted. And if you were a man and you had liked the MAC makeup product, which is some makeup company, I guess, you had a higher tendency or likelihood that you could be gay. And so naturally, like Kaczynski and his colleagues started finding ways to categorize people. But it goes way deeper than that, because now you have to think we've got a few more million participants by 2012, and now the model's really starting to get refined, Cade. So like, get this. This is really kind of crazy. With only 68 Facebook likes, so let's say you put out 68 Facebook likes in a year. You like 68 different things. With that amount of information, Kaczynski's model could determine your skin color, your sexual orientation, your affiliation to a political party, your general intelligence, your religious affiliation, whether or not you had alcoholic or cigarette or drug use in your past. And then he probably could determine whether or not your parents had been divorced. Only 68 likes.
Well, yeah, that's incredible. But I guess at the same time too, when I think about it, like, I mean, I think about when I'm scrolling through social media or whatever, and I'm not huge on social media, but let's say Twitter and Facebook that I do like to participate in, I can tell you that, especially during the election, that I could tell you by the status that I read what the color of the person's skin is. Right. It was amazing that it doesn't really seem like that big of a stretch to me that you put some brain power, right, this Cambridge grad, and some people with a lot of time to refine their testing, that they could boil us down like that, because I think that it probably is that simple. And I'm not sure if that's because human beings are that simple, or if it's because over time the media has shaped us and put us into these buckets and told us these are the categories that you have to fit into, right? That's something that I struggle with, I wrestle with when I think about, well, these are the options because these are what someone else told us the options were, but what if I want somewhere in between? But it's interesting that we would all sift into those 5 different categories, and I can't imagine what companies could do with that kind of information.
Well, we're getting there, actually. So I'm going to give you a few more examples. Now, let's say you had liked 150 different things. With only 150 likes on Facebook, the model was better at predicting your behavior than your own family members would be. Okay? And then with 300 likes, so twice as many, 300 total likes, Kaczynski's model claims to have known the person or known the person's behavioral patterns better than their own spouse or partner. So we're talking about like real insight into the way a person acts and generally the way a person behaves in their life. So could also make determinations based off like the number of profile pictures a person had. If they had a bunch of profile pictures, they were probably more like obsessive about their personality, or obsessive about the number of friends they had, determined introversion and extroversion. And then now with the invention of like the motion sensor in some of the later iPhones, you could also start to reveal how frequently a person traveled, which would also relate to maybe potentially introversion and extroversion, just by how frequently they were bouncing around town in a given day or sitting at home playing video games. So you can see this is becoming a very, very powerful model, but it doesn't really become maybe dangerous until you turn it on its head and you use it to then become a search engine of people. So what Kaczynski was able to do was, by taking all of these survey results and comparing them and pairing them with the Ocean studies, he was able to do like a search engine for humans by searching for such things as like finding all anxious fathers, or trying to search for all undecided Democrats. And now all of a sudden, he's found a way to like really get control of certain people groups and identify them more dangerously. That's starting to seem a little bit wild, right?
Yeah, well, it's crazy to me that the point that you talked about that what it was 150 likes and they could predict your behavior better than your family or better than your spouse. And
Right.
I don't want to derail us, but I don't know. That blows my mind today that we can be known more by technology than the people that we're in closest, human proximity. We were talking about this earlier before we got on, but the fact that I'm at the water cooler, and the water cooler for centuries, well, or as long as water coolers have existed, right, have been the place that people just make small talk. They talk about the weather or the big game. Are going to come there and have some kind of interaction. And I go to the water cooler today, and I notice after reading some of these articles and preparing for the podcast, the first thing I do is I see the guy, I come in with close proximity to him, and he pulls out his phone. Because the thought of interacting with another human being was so uncomfortable. And so I guess it doesn't surprise me in some ways that we could get known by technology in this way. And then, of course, when you can make it a mathematical process, all of a sudden you're going to really pull some interesting conclusions out of just a bunch of numbers and a bunch of patterns and things like that. But that is insane to me.
Yeah, I think it points to the fact that we really have started to become or identify more in the virtual world than we do even in the physical world. Might be more true of millennials and teens who are more active on some of the newer social media platforms like Snapchat, which is now seeing like an increase in usage. I want to say it was something around like 10 hours per week is the average amount that a teenager is using Snapchat. So that's pretty remarkable. That's a person who's practically living a virtual identity. How frequently do you think people are on social media in general?
Oh, it's a crazy amount. So article that I saw, it's kind of ironic that we're pulling information from articles on a podcast like this, talking about whether or not we need to be skeptical of media, but maybe we just need to have a little bit of faith and take some of these numbers. I think I read that it was 31 hours that the average teenager was spending either consuming, from Netflix, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, all of the social medias combined. It was 31 hours. I mean, it was insane. And another thing that this study pointed out was that the average kid had answered that they had like 10 close friends 5 or 10 years ago. And now when asked the same question, most of those folks are saying like they have no more than 2 friends that they consider to be close. So at the same time, we're becoming more communal virtually. We're actually becoming far less communal humanistically from what I've observed.
Right. And in my personal experiences, my communications or relationships on social media are not nearly as deep as they would be with a person in reality. So it's not surprising, I guess, that it's pretty easy to understand a person better than a friend or even better than a spouse when that friend or spouse is spending more time on the virtual world liking certain products than they are actually interacting and communicating in the real world.
Right. And whether or not that's a good or a bad thing, I guess gets a little bit subjective. But I do think that there tends to be a problem. And I think that like big companies, right? So I work at a big corporation, would say that there is a struggle with independence. There's a struggle with interpersonal relationships, with communication skills amongst these millennials, because this is the world that we're coming from, right? It's becoming far less communal, and it's really hurting our ability to influence, our ability to work cooperatively. And albeit the internet's providing us more opportunities than ever to not work in those kind of environments, I'm not sure where I stand on whether or not I think that's going to be a bad thing in the long term for society or a good one. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, actually, I'll get back to Kaczynski's story because he actually had some things to say about this. Actually, towards the end of his research in 2014, he started leaving warnings on a lot of his research publications saying things that like, hey, this could pose a threat to an individual's well-being, freedom, or even their life. If this research continues and if major corporations get access to this information. So he was seeing for the very first time, perhaps, how embedded people are in the virtual world and how easy it is to access their personal information and then potentially influence them. So it's about this time. Oh, go ahead.
No, well, I was wondering when did you say that this research took place?
Well, the research started in 2008. But
Okay.
he continued and really like honed his model in 2012. And then it wasn't until 2014, actually, that he got approached by this organization. Now we're going to get into some of the murkier waters. He got approached by an organization called the Strategic Communications Laboratory. And this organization wanted to buy his model. He didn't know anything about them, and he started looking into them. And it turned out that they had been involved in like Nigerian and Ukrainian elections, and they had been trying to influence these elections using psychometrics and the basic analysis of data. But he didn't really know to what extent they were capable of doing anything. And so when they offered to buy his model, he actually backed off and said, like, this is not a good idea. I think this is dangerous. But got circumvented by a colleague at Oxford, or rather at Cambridge. His colleague was probably, I don't know, like shadowing him and was somehow able to replicate a lot of this model. Ended up sharing the model with SCL, the Strategic Communications Laboratory. That particular colleague changed his name, moved to Singapore. We haven't heard much of him since, if you can believe all of this. It's a bit of a conspiratorial rat race at this point. But that guy has now,
didn't he?
Yeah, he probably cashed out. He left Cambridge, and now we're left sitting with this organization called the Strategic Communications Laboratory, who has Kaczynski's model or some variant of Kaczynski's model.
Yeah.
And that's where we'll kind of get into how SCL was able to use this model.
Yeah, but it's so interesting to me as we're talking about this, because when you think about it, the world hasn't changed all that much, right? If there's a way to monetize something, if there's a way to organize data, data only exists because money is around, because it's going to be leverageable, because people are going to be able to use it and wield it for their own purposes. And I'm not implying that that's always a bad thing, but it seems like human beings do a pretty consistent job of finding a bad way to manipulate it. And I guess it depends on your point of view. Maybe if the politician that you really like was able to leverage this kind of data and get elected when they shouldn't have gotten elected, maybe you think that that's a good outcome for the world. But I myself am very skeptical about the power that these large data companies now hold over us, because like you said, they know us better than our families do. And that, I mean, that was always something that seemed like, you know, it's like, is there privacy anymore? Can we be known exclusively to a few people? And it sounds like maybe not, especially if we're on social media.
Yeah, the privacy discussion might be a little bit different than the one we're going to go down today, because that could be an interesting one to table. But my general theory is that no, privacy doesn't exist as it has in the past, and it probably never will. So that's something we have to become comfortable with. But as SCL starts to have more and more influence, the very first project that they get involved with that would be mainstream, that you and I and anybody listening today might have known about, and that was the Leave.eu organization. So Leave.eu was a website that was put together by Nigel Farage's right-wing Brexit group, right? So these are the people that wanted to leave the European Union in the UK, led by Nigel Farage, who, side note, if you haven't seen Nigel Farage's or his speech to the European Union after the Brexit vote, it's pretty hilarious. Have you seen that, Kate?
Yeah, it is unbelievable. That dude, just go check it out.
Yeah, just check it out. Just let him tell EU exactly what he thinks about that.
Yeah.
Leave.eu's SCL and has obviously very good outcomes. But it's not until SCL gets involved with the Donald Trump administration, or rather the Donald Trump campaign, that they become even more mainstream, and how I've learned of them. So the CEO of SCL basically became the head digital marketing guy for Donald Trump. And so just prior to like all the political campaigns kicking off this past 2 or 3 years, the general theory of how to go about campaigning was to do demographic conceptual based campaigning. So Cade, that basically means like all women were going to get the same generic message from the Trump campaign, for example, or all black people would get the exact same message from the Clinton campaign. So it's kind of like the old way of doing business. SCL came in and absolutely turned that on its head using Kaczynski's general model, psychometrics, not demographics. So they combined Ocean, the personality assessment, with the big data, and then use targeted ads to go and try to control the outcome, right? Or convince the voter. So like basically the way they did this was by buying data. That's scary to think, but most data is available for sale. As you talked about the capitalization in the United States, especially, you can go to land registries and you can buy information about people that own land in the United States. You can find out shopping data about a particular individual by buying it through big data companies. So that's exactly what SCL did with Trump's money. They went out and they bought a bunch of data. Then they ran these calculations using the 5 personality profiles. And then they have literally profiled every American adult in the United States, according to the CEO. Now, whether or not that is true is yet to be proven, but they claim to have profiled 230 million Americans, Cade. That means you and I have a specific profile according to SCL.
I wonder if they got to dad, though, right? That's the question. Did they get to the 62-year-old Marine that has no smartphone? Well, actually, he did just get a smartphone, but he didn't have it before the election. Only consumes, TV. He gives nothing of himself to technology. So I wonder if they got a hold of him, but maybe he's the one outlier.
He might be the outlier. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the reality is that voter did play a big role this year. So whether or not they've had as much influence, that is SCL and these psychometric groups had as much influence as we're saying they have, is very hard to quantify. But we know that these organizations did develop like highly concentrated and highly focused advertisements. So I'll just give an example. Like for the Second Amendment gun rights, it's a heated issue for sure. But if you were targeting the neurotic, like conscientious audience, family members, the way that SCL would basically tweak the campaign motto, they would talk about how burglary is like a legitimate threat in your region because you live in such and such an area of Chicago, and gun violence is a real thing. Your only insurance policy in the prevention and saving of your child's life is a gun. And so that would be the message to those folks. And then the people that are sort of in the more closed or agreeable audience, those people that are probably already made up their mind about the Second Amendment and are in favor of it, they play on tradition and family heritage. But all of this was worked out scientifically, analyzing the data.
No, it's really really interesting because, I think that a lot of those things seem to be reasonable, but it sounds like it gave Trump, since he had those kind of resources at his disposal, maybe a bit more sophisticated. And I use the word sophisticated lightly, or when I use it in the same breath as Donald Trump. But you wonder if maybe the guy knew what he was doing all along when he was targeting these certain groups, right? Everyone was talking about the popular vote after the election. Who gives a rip about the popular vote until the Constitution gets amended? We're stuck with the Electoral College. So he was doing what it took to win. And it is a phenomenon. Right. People are going to be studying this election for 100 years, still trying to figure out what exactly happened.
Well, we're onto something here in this podcast that I haven't heard spoken about in as much detail. I'll give it that much. So Trump basically gave SCL $15 million. And there were only a few dozen people. Like they set up in San Antonio, Texas, despite Texas clearly being a Trump-favored state. But what they did, Cade, is they gave an app to all the Trump canvassers. And canvassers is actually something like I participated in quite a bit in college when I was really into politics. Canvassing is literally going door to door, knocking on people's doors and asking them, are they going to vote? Who do they intend to vote for? And then, hopefully winning over the people that haven't chosen who they're going to vote for in favor of your candidate, and then convincing those that have already made their mind up in favor of your candidate that they must get out and vote because it's critically important to the success of the candidate and the success of their wallet, essentially. Okay, but right. What they did was they gave Trump canvassers an app, and I've seen images of this app. It actually identified the political views and personality types of every single home that they'd be approaching in a given day. So it's a map basically of a region. Let's say they were in the Haitian district in Miami. This one got pretty famous. I think that's like North Beach, Miami. I was there pretty recently. It's like where the Haitians, or a good portion of the Haitians, live. So Trump canvassers were going around to these houses where they had already nailed the political views and personality types of everybody in that home. And they were coming in with a prepackaged message that was very anti-Clinton. And they were basically going in talking about how Clinton Foundation screwed up the Haiti earthquake disaster relief. That was the only message. They weren't talking about how Trump is going to benefit them in any other particular category, but they were just speaking about how the Clinton Foundation made a mockery of the Haitian earthquake. Can you believe that?
Wow. No, well, it's interesting. I've actually heard of a pastor up in New York City who calls these things defeater beliefs. And in the context, it's about religious affiliation. But it sounds like what big data can do and what this model has given people power to do is to go in and be able to zero in, put the crosshairs on what it is about these people that make them affiliate with the people that they affiliate with, and then either try to deconstruct it or try to put up a bunch more 2x4s and make it a more solid, standing place. Because there's a lot of people on both of those sides, I think, that might have changed their positions, either got more pro-Trump as the election went on or moved from Hillary's camp into the other camp. But that's an amazing thing. He was able to leverage that in such a sophisticated way.
Right. It's highly
his campaign was.
It's very intelligent what these guys at SCL were able to do. And even though it's pretty hard to evaluate exactly the influence of the psychometrics in the election, in terms of actually tracking the numbers, we know that it was actually SCL, their advisement based off of mapping data that said in the final week, we are focusing on nothing but Michigan and Wisconsin. And those were the table turners. So it's probably fair to say that SCL had a larger impact. Big data and the analysis and coordination between big data and psychometrics and the analysis of personalities had a larger impact on this election than most average Americans and most people listening today know or realize.
Yeah. And if I recall correctly, so it was Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan that were the big ones that, could have gone either way, that ended up flipping for Trump. And I think the numbers ended up being it might have been 25,000 votes combined between those three states that had they gone the other way, Hillary was taking the White House. It was so nail-bitingly close. But I would also say that I guarantee you that Hillary's campaign and lots of other organizations think this way. What they might not have had is the level of detail and sophistication of the model that allowed them to zero in. And literally, you're sitting there thinking at times how is he only catering to these one people? Well, as the rest of the people were decided, or those were the most vulnerable people, most people most likely to change their mind, or the most influential. So that's amazing.
Yeah, and then to put a stamp on this story, and we can move on, but I guess either the chairman of the board or certainly a board member at SCL was Steve Bannon. And now everybody knows Steve Bannon because he's basically Trump's right-hand man, and he's been appointed, a number of cabinet positions that we've never seen just a pure outsider be appointed to in the past. So potentially Steve Bannon, I've heard some say as intelligent a Harvard Business School graduate as has ever come through the school. That was a few professors at HBS who said that much about Steve Bannon. He's probably an influencer in this approach to use SCL in a really intelligent campaign.
Yeah, but it's really interesting because we've been talking about how big data can be used to influence large numbers of people, individually, right? But then also when you think about the influence that data can have on public opinion, I mean, even though they didn't have these sophisticated data models, it's really, really not new news that there are ways that you can subtly manipulate images or stories or lines that are going to make them more believable or make people identify with one part or the other. They can really just key on anything that's polarizing. And to me, what jumps out is, I've been watching the O.J. Simpson documentary with Cuba Gooding Jr. on Netflix in the 10-part series. And it's unbelievable. It goes down into so much detail about the case. But initially, right, Newsweek magazine comes out with a picture of OJ, and it's his mugshot, and you see it next to the actual picture of OJ, and it was literally just decolored so that he would look blacker. And it's the same thing with Steve Bannon. I noticed this because when you listen to the guy, I mean, regardless of political views, if you can set political views aside, the guy just seems extremely intelligent, really, really well read. Seems like he's got his thoughts together. Now, whether or not you agree, that's a separate question. But as soon as he got elected, everyone was talking about the things that were polarizing about him, and all the pictures were the worst possible pictures you could ever show of any human being. He looked like a Wolverine that had just ravaged somebody in the middle of the woods in winter or something like that. He looked like an animal. And I'm not going to lie, as soon as you see that, doubt starts to creep into your mind, right? You associate different connotations with those kind of images. And so it's amazing that people can use those things to subtly influence the way that you see big ideas, right? Like big idea, Steve Bannon's not a good guy. Big idea, Donald Trump is associated with a not so good guy. Big idea, don't vote for Donald Trump, right? You know, like that's the simple linear type of logic that they can utilize and manipulate.
But I think that's what we're trying to call attention to, at least in our own lives. I need to be so much more conscientious of this, because it would be so much easier to, in this bite-sized era, in the Twitter era of however many characters are in a tweet.
140 or something.
Yeah, 140 characters in a tweet. Like, we don't stick around to find out more. We don't read between the lines, and we certainly don't read entire articles. We see headlines, we see images, and they leave a lasting impression in our brain. I did have a chance to dig in on Steve Bannon because he's a fascinating character. And I could tell you, if that's the way that the leftist media is painting him out to be, they're doing a disservice to who the guy actually is. He's got some issues. Personally, I can't stand the fact that he is a nationalist above and beyond anything else. You know, to me, he's a bit of an isolationist. Like, let's put up the wall, make America great, because like the only real vision that he has seems to be America's, I don't know, America's vision or something like that. Like, America is better than everyone else. I get a little bit of that impression from him. But other than that nationalistic view, he's a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he's brilliant, and that, I think that's an objective fact. Now, again, whether or not he's using his brilliance to promote holistic, healthy ideas, I'm not so sure, but it's actually interesting, because just that little point, I don't want to get a sidebarred, but I know that there's actually been some Republicans come out and criticize Trump lately, like Rand Paul, for being too like he's launched drone strikes at a rate that no other president has, and he's just been, you know, bombing places like crazy. And he really was talking a little bit more about isolationist type of thinking, which was a popular idea, I think, in America, that a lot of people thought, hey, we have our own problems. We don't need to be a world leader. We don't need to be out there representing kind of the goodness of the Western world like Obama was propagating. But it's just interesting how that's all worked out. But yeah, Shane, so let's get a little bit more practical, because a challenge, as I'm just kind of thinking through my own consumption of media, is all those things that you said, you know, hit me right in the middle of the target. I look at one-liners, I look at titles, I look at images, I look at 30-second news clips, right? Like, you know, the DAPL protests, right? You know, there was a video going around of a dog that was bleeding from his mouth, and then they edit the clip so that it looks like this dog has gone out and bitten one of the protesters, when in fact the whole clip shows that the protester had taken a freaking baseball bat to the mouth of the dog and it's bleeding. Just one more example of how things can be skewed and give you the wrong impression, and all of a sudden that kind of starts to pile up. So I wonder what kind of takeaways we could have. Maybe not takeaways, but just how do I become a better consumer, more responsible consumer of media, so that I can get the right the right information to make decisions about what I think about the world.
I think it probably starts with avoiding single topic headline articles, reading the article, and then assuming that's all the story is to tell. I think that it's better to actually try to on individual topics over the course of a period of time to get to the bottom of the truth. Because that's what we're trying to do in the Pseudo Scholars podcast as well. Like, gain some depth of knowledge as opposed to just surface level bite-sized information. So if you're going to get to the bottom of the truth behind climate change, or you really want to investigate your beliefs in God, whatever it has to do with, I think it's a much broader, deeper exploration that's going to take a long period of time. So like for me personally, I have my OneNote section and it's tabbed on my computer, and I have different topics. Like climate change was one I was just really interested in most recently. Obviously, like the general consensus now in the United States is that climate change is real. I don't know if maybe that's not true, but in Europe, it certainly is the case, where I lived most of last year. And I just wanted to challenge that a bit and find out for myself if I really believed that we were influencing climate change. And so I found lots of resources, some of which were academic. And really over the course of like a 2-month period on and off, I did a study on what I thought I should know about climate change. And so I read some stuff from maybe the left-leaning media, and I read some stuff from the right-leaning media. And then now I've made up my own mind on the matter. But really just singular topics from Fox News or CNN is unlikely to get you to the truth.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And if we are trying to grow, right, that's part of the goals of the podcast is to grow, is to challenge, is to be healthily skeptical. I gotta be honest, right? Having grown up, watched Fox News, and that was the primary media mode that was coming through the house. It's an entertainment show, right? That all of the big news shows, big media sources are all really about entertaining and catering to the audience, and it becomes even more and more ridiculous the longer that you watch it and you see that I can already predict what's going to be said about every single thing, whether or not they're going to take this viewpoint or that viewpoint. But I think that's really good to do. The other thing I would think is a decent application in light of us talking about the media and maybe it hurting millennials, right? That's us, right? So hurting young people today in terms of our communal desires, in terms of our ability to influence people, in terms of our ability to be in relationship with people. One of the things that I found most helpful is to engage with people that think differently than me, right? So one thing is to study and learn articles, but the other thing is, why do other people on the other side see things differently? And for instance, in my world, race relations, right? Having grown up in a protected, more white environment with mainly white friends at an all white church, those kind of things, I just had a view of race and a view of how the other race thinks about things. And the more that I talked, the more that I was able to kind of reform my ideas and refine and get to where I think is a more accurate understanding of everybody's viewpoint. And I guess if we can understand everybody's viewpoint and why they think what they think, that probably gives us the best opportunity to actually make some kind of conclusion about it that's accurate based upon facts, and we understand even our own motivations. Because I would say that understanding those is key to getting to some kind of truthful conclusion as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think some combination of those two examples that we just gave would lead people down a more reasonable line of thinking in terms of trying to find the truth behind some of these really complicated and very tenuous situations or topics. You know, the politics can get very heated. It can really get people inflamed quickly when you talk about a subject matter that's close to the heart because they've had an experience or they have a family member that feels very strongly about those issues. So being able to set aside the emotion is critically important, but hard to do.
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with you on that one, and it's something everybody can do a lot better and be more intellectually honest, maybe with all of these different areas and hold things up to the light. But maybe we would be a lot better off in this country and in this world if we weren't so quick to assume why people think what they think, or even what they think, what it actually means to think what they think. Because what I've found is that it's usually not a good versus bad argument a lot of times, right? Like immigration, and I know we're getting close here, but immigration, right? And nobody wants to think about poor immigrants that are fleeing war-torn countries that they had absolutely nothing to do with the situation that they were born into and brought up into, want to come to the States, be afforded the same opportunities that we are. I don't think most things that consider themselves moral are just like, yes, absolutely, let's turn them back around, send the ship back, send the plane back. We don't want them in our country. But then you deal with the more pragmatic side, and I really see all of these ideas is have to live in between, right? The pull of the left, the pull of the right, and really trying to understand why both of those sides understand ideas and values the way that they do. It's just been helpful to more accurately, try to depict them in my mind.
Yeah, and just carrying that grain of salt makes sense, doesn't it? That recognition that media is a big business. In fact, it's a lot bigger business than I even realized before starting to do a bunch of research on the topic. I mean, it turns out that like most of the mainstream media, so that means the content that we consume, is owned and curated by only 6 corporations. So not to be an anti-corporate guy, I used to work for a large corporation. Corporations drive our economy forward and employ billions of people around the world, probably. But the truth that only 6 corporations are controlling the information that we're receiving is a little bit concerning. So like 90% of American media is coming from those 6 organizations, and either content in the form of print or in television or in radio. And so those corporations that people probably know, like Comcast, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, like Time Warner, and there's one other, CBS. And between all of them, they're making enormous headway in gathering up and consolidating more and more. Like Comcast just bought NBC, I think, pretty recently. And NBC has just recently invested in Snapchat. So Snapchat, we're talking about social media quite a bit. A lot of people know that Snapchat just had their initial public offering last week, and it seems to have been a success. Evan Spiegel at 26 or 27 years old just made $5 billion more, which is just mind blowing. But NBC was one of the first companies to get in there and buy up $150 million worth of shares. So like this consolidated big media tells me that the information that they're sharing has a major agenda at the heart of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's the key to understanding that these people are making big bucks in exploiting and creating agendas and things like that. So I don't know. I think that most people have a tendency to listen to a form of media or listen to a side of politics and associate that with right, and that there's a moral opponent to that on the other side. And I don't know, when all the money kind of settles, I think they're both looking like they got pretty big pockets, right? Bill O'Reilly and Rush Limbaugh. I think Rush Limbaugh's radio contract is like $40 million annually, and that guy is like crazy. It's insane. It's really something to consider when we think about, is this a trustworthy source? Could they be being manipulated or exploited, or even do they not understand the influence that the corporate powers that be have on them and the kind of content that they're producing?
Yeah. So maybe just kind of in closing, Cade, we could talk a little bit about the rise of like social journalism. Not that either of us are necessarily media experts, but this is actually something that's been pretty cool about the rise of more information and more flow and the ease of getting information out there, because now we don't have to go through a publication company and we don't need to hire editors. It's as simple as going on Medium, which I think was owned by the Twitter guy, isn't it? I don't know who started Medium, but that's a pretty awesome platform where people can go on and create like really good quality posts without having to be experts in or rather they are experts, but without having some kind of like financial backing or the means of publishing their information. And now that information is out there and we can take it, we can interpret it, and we can also dispel a lot of mistruths, because these people aren't necessarily allegiant organization like one of those 6 media companies. So that social journalism piece is pretty cool.
Oh yeah, well, and that's one of the things that the internet has created. And right, it's just like basic economic theory. When you introduce more suppliers into any kind of market, it's going to drive the price down and the quality of the good up. So hopefully that's something that we have a little bit more freedom in this country to go out and consume. So maybe even a good idea is to just get away from some of these big major news sites that we know have agendas, that we know have that doesn't make their content wrong, right? But it does make it skewed. It does make it slanted. And so I think that's a beautiful part of what the internet unlocks for us, is that we can have access to lots and lots of information, which should give us lots of different cross references for data points and hopefully lead to slightly more accurate conclusions. But definitely something we need to think more about.
Yeah. So yeah, the rise of fake news is a challenge, but for those who are up for the challenge, I think this era of greater access to information is better to be a part of. I'd rather be living now than in the era of the Gutenberg printing press. That goes without saying, because now I can make up my own mind about what is true and what is false. It just requires an additional filter. It requires more reason. I mean, there's this really awesome organization called Stop Fake. People should check them out. They're a Ukrainian social journalism organization, basically, and they're solely dedicated to dispelling the lies that are coming out of the Russian media propaganda machine. If you live in Russia, you get one form of state-sponsored media. Here in the United States, we're complaining about our Fox News and our CNN. And while they definitely have agendas, mostly all tied to making money, at least they're not tied to like the total control and manipulation of the people the way state-sponsored media in Russia is, which is solely aimed at uplifting Vladimir Putin, their demagogue, and tearing down the West. So Stop Fake, this Ukrainian organization, has like put together like a comparison of every story that gets published by Russian media and then tells the truth. And there was some wild statistic that I don't remember quite down to like the exact percentage, but in Ukraine, lots of people do get, especially in Eastern Ukraine, lots of people do get their media from Russia. And so what they've found through Stop Fake is the number of people trusting Russian media has gone down tremendously because of Stop Fake.
Well, and I think that's the kind of things that people want to fight for. And then I would also kind of drop my 2 cents in there that says there's a reason why power is concentrated at the top. There's a reason why media looks the way it does. It's because it's entertaining. And it's because probably for the most part, the 300 million Americans that are consuming media are usually, and I'm guilty of it too, more concerned about whether or not something's outrageous or catchy or entertaining than they necessarily are about the content. And so I would say it takes a reformation of people's consumption habits, because I guarantee you there's something that Fox News is going to pay attention to, and that's when their ratings go down. Right. And so when the demand for true, accurate, hopefully not emotional, hopefully not too skewed news goes down, then maybe we would see the suppliers in the economy start to change the goods that they're producing. But that's challenging in a society where entertainment is everything, right? And we want to be entertained. That's why Bill O'Reilly has the best news show on cable TV ever, because he's really entertaining, and that's a fact of the matter, right? Because people are consuming it. So just something else to think about.
Talking about highest ratings. Yeah. You're right. I mean, that's what these media companies are. They're entertainment companies, and I guess that makes me feel a little bad for some of my prior comments, because I'm pretty glad that we have Time Warner, who owns HBO, who creates Game of Thrones, because my gosh, that show is incredibly entertaining. Like, they create wonderful content. It's just the propaganda and the agenda behind some of the political content that we have to be wary about.
Yeah. And freedom of the press is a foundational thing. And we're going to have to live with the good and the bad, right? And sometimes the freedom of the press is going to lead the masses towards something that's more consumer friendly and entertaining and less truthful and more biased. And that's because that's what the masses are demanding. So we have power to change things in that way. And again, it probably just goes back to not settling and just not giving into the laziness that we so often get into, because that's where I fall a lot of the time is right. The small news bites. How do I quickly get educated so that I can discuss something at the water cooler or not if the guy's looking at his phone? But that's definitely some habits that we need to change. So
yeah, and I'd like to close on the idea of the freedom of the press. I would drive that home, and as much as I can agree or disagree with people on various political topics, that's a line in the sand. That is the difference in the United States and Russia. The freedom of the press is the core of what our media needs to be about. So I'm slightly frustrated, to be honest, with the Trump administration in recent days when we hear about them kicking out specific media sources that are more critical of the administration. Like, that to me sounds like poor behavior. I don't know the truth behind the story necessarily, so I'll say it with a grain of salt. But the freedom of the press has to be the core, the very core and the very backbone of our media in the United States.
Yeah, I agree. You can't have your cake and eat it too, Mr. Trump. So
yeah, that's right. Okay. Well, I think we'll close on that, Cade, but we do need a challenge this week, because every week we try to. So we've recommended, I guess, 3 variations or 3 different approaches that people could take towards improving the way that they consume media. Which one should we take on as our challenge for this week?
Well, just being that I'm a little bit more communal and a little less likely to sit down and read a 2-hour article like I probably need to do a little bit more. I think my goals is to talk with some of my coworkers. I've got some different demographics in my immediate cube space, different genders, different religious affiliations, things like that. And so I'd like to go and bring up some issues with them and try to get a little bit of feedback and understanding what it is about the opposite side or about other viewpoints that's causing me to think a little bit differently. And maybe even particularly, I got to ask about this Beauty and the Beast question. I know it feels irrelevant in light of all the heavy things that we've been talking about, but in Beauty and the Beast, Disney has prompted their first openly gay character. and people are freaking out about it, and people are threatening to boycott. And Emma Watson, who's the main character, is really known as an outspoken feminist and things like that. But immediately, right, I've already got a spin. I've already got a way that a bend in this way, in this space, because of my upbringing. So I'd like to hear, is this a big deal to other people, or is this just something that the media wants to get people rattled up about because they like division, or they like making their scope of people look more like themselves? So
Wow,
that's what I'm
I
gonna
didn't
check
know
out.
about the story actually. Which character is gay?
I think it's Clogsmere. I think the clock.
Is that
I'm
the
not.
clock?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. Don't fact check me on that one, but needless to say, I'll get to the bottom of this.
Okay, actually, I'm interested in that, and just to share my thoughts. I mean, let's be honest. If Disney's just trying to represent society, and we have homosexual people in society, what's wrong with a character being homosexual? I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a great point.
But that'll be an interesting one. I like that as well. I'll take on the same challenge. I'm trying to be more empathetic in my marriage, so I should be more empathetic in my politics as well. I'll try to find some people, some Argentines with different opinions, and kind of be empathetic to where they're standing from, and we can report back next week on how we get on with our little project.
Yeah, that sounds good. Sounds like a plan.
Okay, cool. So that closes out this week's episode 2. Next week on the Pseudo Scholars, we're going to explore what some scientists are calling the most important scientific discovery of our lifetime. If you haven't heard about CRISPR genetics, you should be looking into it because it could cure disease, period. So that's some pretty heavy stuff. But
Cliffhanger.
that's all I got. So later, little brother.
All right, later, big brother.